end of last episode, we got the turbo mounted up there in the place that we wanted it. Manifold all welded up, all worked well. Since then, I have added a couple of support braces onto the manifold to support the turbine housing flange. They're basically just made out of some chopped up box steel. Most of the things I make are just made out of commonly available material like that. Just takes a bit of time. If you don't have the equipment to fold things up, you can just use box steel and aluminium, that sort of thing, and just cut it up and make it into the shape you need. So you'll notice that there's a bolt or a couple of bolts. So you're probably thinking, why is it bolted on there and welded on here? Well, the reason for that is these things' job is to support this flange, which is obviously supporting the turbo. The problem is if this is going to expand and contract and it's going to move around a bit. Not a lot, but it will. So what I've done is I've bolted them to these tabs, which are originally would have bolted the exhaust system on. And we're using that sort of folded steel. So it's not super strong, but it is fairly strong, and it's going to allow this to actually move around a bit, because if you want to stop things from cracking, you do have to allow them to move. You can't just lock it down really tight, because it will still try and move if you lock it down, and something will break. So you've got to allow a little bit of movement. It's not much movement. You probably would only notice it as witness marks on here after a lot of expansion and contraction occurs, but that's the reason why it's not welded in both places, because you need to allow it to move a little bit, but also support the weight. So that's what that's doing. Wastegate's fine, it's not really heavy enough to worry about. You'll also notice that the manifold is in two pieces. That's obviously factory forward, that's how they've designed it. The reason for that is a very long engine heats up and the manifold changes length, and if it does it too many times, it cracks somewhere. Something's got to give. So what they've done is put this slip joint there, which is a good idea. So that there basically bolts on there and seals with that cone, and this just slips inside it, and that will allow that to move. And it most certainly will move in the heating and cooling of the engine, and that's probably why this manifold's still in one piece after 300,000 kilometres. So pretty common on big long sixes, although not used on the turbo version of this engine. And as a result, when you undo the bolts, bolting the manifold on this one and others, it's not uncommon, the manifold just goes twang and turns into a boomerang. So it's that bent that it rocks up and down on the bench. So engineering inconsistencies, don't know why, but yeah, some things are made better than others, and just because it looks flash doesn't mean it works in the long term. So if you've got an FG, be aware that when you undo your exhaust manifold, it's probably going to be bent when you try and put it back on. All right, so we're just going to bolt this back together and get it ready to put on the car. I've given it a little flatten off just to clean off all the cast iron scale on the surface there. We're just going to use the original gasket. It's a MLS type thing, so it's not going to need to be replaced. Once we've got that up in there, we're then going to move on to mounting the radiator, intercooler and air conditioning condenser, because I have to wait for some exhaust material to arrive to start on the exhaust system. Just going to throw the wastegate on now before we put the manifold on, just to make it easier to get at. I'm too short to reach stuff like that, and I don't want Rodriguez to pay out on me. So if this little thing falls out when you're playing with your wastegate, that's called the wastegate seat. That's what the valve actually seals on. So there's a taper there, and it pops in like that. If you don't have that in there, it's not going to work at all. So there's a little recess in the flange that sits into. Basically goes down like that. Seats well. It's got these fancy clamps that sort of open up like that, so you don't have to nut and bolt them.
Missing a 10mm?
No, I'm missing a 5mm Allen key, which is like the Allen key equivalent of a 10mm.
This one, is this 5mm?
No, I would use it if it was. Derp.
Oh, that wasn't so hard,
I'll use this while I'm looking for the other one. Bedford's fun.
The turbo is mounted up in there. Al and I were just having a fiddle with dump pipe locations, intercooler piping location and oil drains. It's going to be very tight and tricky in there, but we'll get to that once we're there. Still waiting on some exhaust pumps to come, so once we get them, we'll get into it. In the meantime, we've got the radiator and condenser and intercooler out. So I got this from the boys up at Rim Wreckers. I think it's a Cressida one or something Toyota. It definitely looks like it. It is brand new. It's a full alloy unit. These you can get off eBay for next to nothing, so luckily we didn't pay anything for it. The air conditioning condenser we got from Oldscock. This is just a generic one. These work a whole lot better than the old serpentine ones, which was fitted to the car. This, just the generic one, will be mounted up the front there with the intercooler. So this doesn't have to come out. The radiator may have to come out more often than this. So the intercooler and the condenser will be mounted right up the front of the car. There's heaps of room here. So mounting wise should be pretty easy. This intercooler we're using is off Millsy's Turbo 1UZ Hilux from years ago. So this thing was working fine. He upgraded to a bigger intercooler and this has just been sitting at his house decorating the garage. It's got some weird funky blow-off valve mounts on there and outlets have been cut off. So this will go up in there and we can figure out which side where we're going to mount it, and then also outlets and stuff in there, inlets and outlets on it. So we'll get to it.
The intercooler is being mounted to the factory radiator support bar. A couple of alloy angles are cut to size and are welded to the top of the intercooler core.
Woody's done an all right job for a keyboard jockey, I suppose. We've actually mounted it to this bar here, and that bar's actually been added, presumably by Holden when they put the 202 in it, or 186 or whatever it had in it when it came to the country. It's been properly fabricated, but it's actually bolted on, and they've cut off this centre support. Must have been to increase the room, move the radiator forward, something like that. Obviously they put a much longer engine in, so she's already been modded, so that leaves us open to do whatever we want. That's what I reckon anyway.
How are my TIG skills?
Yeah, all right.
I've got a lot to learn.
Be better if you'd listen.
Yeah. I haven't picked up a TIG. I think the last time I touched a welder was working on the Cresta, I think.
What's your excuse? It's right over there, and you're here every day.
Been flat out editing your mug on videos all day.
Yeah. That's easy, man.
Sure it is.
Let's make some bottom mounts. Is it done yet?
Not yet.
Hurry up.
The lower mounting tabs are welded on, repeating the same process as the upper mounts. The inlet and blow-off valve mounts are then cut off as they won't suit this application.
Might want to turn the compressor on.
The intercooler tank is cleaned up with a die grinder and wire brush, and a 3-inch 90-degree bend is tack welded onto the tank. The outlet also gets a 90-degree bend tacked on, and the intercooler is test fitted to make sure it's not making friends with anything in the engine bay. Everything is clear, so the bends get welded up for good.
Intercooler's all done. I'm by far not a welder. I have had a bit of practice on the TIG over the few years working here with Al. I think I've done an okay job, seeing as I haven't touched a welder for the last 6 months, probably longer.
Looks good to me, bro, but I've got welding flash, so I can't see.
There you go. So the standard bob mount has been cut off, welded up. We're going to install the SV50 closer to the throttle body down there on the passenger side. I think Millsy wants to cover this in export black, so give it a nice fresh coat of super cheap black, we'll be good to go. Next thing is condenser and radiator. So the condenser goes in between the intercooler and the radiator. I don't know what you've got planned to mount the radiator at all, but it's another whole thing in itself because it's just got to kind of sit there. So
We'll figure something out. But guess where I'm going?
yeah, Al's gone dirtbag riding. I've got to go to work now, so. See ya.
How was your ride, Al?
They're good.
Good. Didn't break any fingers?
No, nothing broken.
Good stuff.
Didn't even fall off.
Nice. What the hell is this?
That's for next week.
How are you going to mount that?
You're going to weld some mounts onto the intercooler tanks
Why me?
because you're the TIG guy now.
You're way better at it than I am.
No, I'm not. I taught you and now you're better.
Is that just like motorbike riding?
Something like that.
So what's that condenser from then?
It's just a generic multi-use thing, but it's a real modern design, so they work really well. That's pretty big. You can get away with half the size of that and they still work really well. Old cock loves them. You're going to weld some of these little bosses on the tank, sort of like that. So this has got M6 thread. That just sort of lifts it up a little bit. Just zot them on. Then we'll just drill holes in the appropriate spots and just bolt them on. Pretty straightforward. You can also do transmission coolers like this. It's sort of a practical way of mounting a transmission cooler. If it's up the front, this is going to be underneath the car, but it works pretty well. You can sort of fit it onto the intercooler itself, and so then you're not making multiple mounting brackets off the car. You can mount the intercooler, then mount the cooler to the intercooler itself. That works pretty well.
The threaded bosses are welded in position on the intercooler tanks with the stainless steel screw threaded inside. This stops the thread from deforming while being welded, and as I found out, it's very easy to stuff things up.
You f***ed that up.
Some short Allen-headed M6 bolts are screwed into the weld-on bosses through some holes that have been drilled into the condenser bracket. Now the condenser is mounted, we can move on to the radiator, which we temporarily mount with a knocky strap.
Check that out.
So the old Ocky strap, eh?
Roadkill style, just like the Impala. Instead of ratchet straps, we use an Ocky strap.
Aussie.
That'd be good.
Job done.
Pretty much, hey? Just like Wi-Fi radiator pipes down, that'd be good.
Bit of garden hose.
That'll get chopped off, eh? Chopped off or modified?
Yeah.
Maybe put it over
We'll
there.
chop it off and put it in the middle more.
What about this? Thermostat housing.
I think we just get rid of the thermostat. It doesn't seem to worry the Cresta. It's only got a tiny little head hole, so that sort of limits the flow anyway.
All right, let's mount from the bottom, I suppose, eh?
Sweet.
Some ideas are discussed and measurements taken so we can cut and bend up some steel that can be our mounting plates for the lower radiator support. Some 25mm box steel is then cut to size and holes drilled in the correct locations for the lower radiator tabs to slide into.
Hey Milwaukee, feel free to hook us up with some batteries. We use a lot of these.
The steel plate is bent to the correct angle and our box steel can then be MIG welded to the mounting plate. The radiator support is removed and given a coat of paint before being bolted back on so we can then support the top of the radiator. Some alloy strap is cut to size, holes drilled and angles bent so that it can be bolted down via the intercooler.
Won't be needing this anymore.
You can use it to hold your esky down.
Yeah, sure.
I was joking, bro.
Chili bin.
It's not a bad idea though. It does get thirsty when you're out on a ride. We've got all our cooling devices up the front here, fitted up and ready to go. Intercooler's got the 90-degree ends on it already, so we'll be able to just connect them directly to our piping and then just continue on with whatever we need to do for the pipes. Aircon is there. The pipes are really easy to get at, and that'll make old Cock happy when he plumbs it up. The radiator is, we've rubber mounted the radiator just to sort of give it a better chance at not corroding out from stray current and that sort of thing. It's still got to have this top fitting change, but we're not going to do that until we sort of work out the rest of our top hose. We'll put it wherever, whatever top hose we get sort of dictates, so it can go anywhere in the top there. So we'll leave that for the moment. We've got to make a new outlet anyway. We won't be able to use that thermostat housing because it faces the wrong way. Previously on the Cresta, we actually just deleted the whole thing and didn't run a thermostat because even though that's like a 2-inch hole, the actual entrance to the cylinder head where the water, like the coolant comes out, is only about this big. So it kind of got its own thermostat anyway. Heating up in cold weather is just not a thing here. We don't really have to worry about that because it just doesn't get cold here. So it's worked fine for the Cresta, so we'll probably just delete it and make a plate and just run a pipe directly off it, then a hose up to here and weld on there, fitting it in the appropriate spot. It'll make it easier for us to sort of set it up when we can make everything so it just fits rather than trying to get hoses to bend around and stretch into the wrong place. Bottom hose should be fine. It's in the right place and the hose is right there, so we'll just go to part shop and grab a few hoses and see what we can make fit. Otherwise, we're pretty good. It fits real nice. As you can see, it's like the engine is a long way back because there's a hell of a lot of cooling going on here. Last thing we'll do when we've finally fitted everything is just seal this up with foam, so all the air that enters does go through and does its job rather than trying to come out the easiest route. I'm going to get on to make the dump pipe now because we need it to be there so we can make all the other pipes and drain hoses and stuff. It's kind of like, if that's not there, we'll probably put something where it's got to go. So you kind of got to start putting things in place so you can then make the other piping and stuff that's got to go around it. I've got a 3-inch donut with like a tight radius bend that we can chop up and use that to make most of the dump pipe. And I've got another stray 90-degree bend left over. And then after that, we'll have to wait until the piping that I've ordered comes, and muffler and cat and that sort of thing. So we'll just make the dump pipe for now so we can move on and finish the rest of the intercooler piping and the oil drains and that sort of thing, and the wastegate outlet on that side. So we'll get into that.
Al cuts up a 3-inch mild steel donut. This gives him 4 tight radius bends to work with. Starting from the turbine housing, one bend is tacked onto the V-band, and Al can then snake his way down around the engine mounts and under the sump. A lot of trial and error is used when making exhaust. Al wasn't happy with how the dump pipe was sitting, so a bend is cut off, repositioned and welded back on. With everything in position and fitting nicely, Al drills a hole and adds in a bung for the wideband O2 sensor to screw into, and then welds up the entire dump pipe.
Just finished the dump pipe. It's still a bit hot. When it cools off a little bit more, we'll paint it in some heat-proof black just to keep the corrosion down. You might be thinking, why isn't it made out of stainless steel? Well, it doesn't really matter what you make it out of. You can make an exhaust out of aluminium if you want. It's as long as it's the appropriate size for the turbine. It doesn't matter. Mild steel is very durable and it's pretty easy to weld. Its disadvantages is probably corrosion resistance. If you have, you're in a climate where you got salted roads or whatever, and rust is a big thing. Mild steel is not great. We definitely don't have that problem here. A coat of paint on that and it'll last forever. It's also a lot cheaper than stainless steel and easier to work with. So there's no reason not to use mild steel on an exhaust system. It's good to go, so we'll paint her up and let it dry overnight and bolt it back on. For those of you that are following SKID Factory Instagram page, you'll notice Woody's been putting up a lot of pics and stories of what's been going on this week, and you'll notice that's pretty much what's going to be in this episode. That's because we're not very far ahead of you, and that's just how it's happening this time. We're still ploughing ahead. I've got other jobs to do, and Woody spends a bit of time potting bonsai plants, so he's busy as well. But since I bought Millsy's wife a blow-off valve, she's opened up the checkbook and everything's good to go, so we're going to keep ploughing on. We'll do intercooler piping and get the inlet manifold back off Matt hopefully this week and bolt that up. And start doing oil drains and plumbing and that sort of thing, and move on to the rest of the exhaust system. Millsy's got the diff and it's getting rebuilt. It's going to get the brakes put on it as well. When we get that back, we'll slam that back in and then we'll be full steam ahead. So it's all moving along. Thanks for watching.
Why are you so argumentative sometimes? Because that's the centre. Isn't that right?
You know what it is now because I marked it instead of guessing. Not straight, bro.
It is.
It's not in the middle either. What the?
It's dead centre.
I told you to use the marks.
No, this thing, the grill's straight. This dodgy ass radiator support that's not straight. This is straight with it.
You should have made it straight.
What does it look like on camera?
Fix it.
It's fine, dude. Look at that. It's sweet.
Oh, bro. This is why you edit.
It's sweet, bro.